Thank you for joining for this episode of the TechSpective podcast. My guest this week is Lisa Plaggemier. So, Lisa, if you could just introduce yourself and a little bit of background, and tell the listeners what you do, and then we'll talk about what's going on in the world.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. I'm Lisa Plaggemier, the Executive Director of the National Cybersecurity Alliance. We're a nonprofit based in DC that's partially funded by the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, otherwise known as CISA, within DHS. My background, though, is actually training and awareness. Before that, it's marketing. I used to market cars and trucks for Ford Motor Company, and then I marketed technology for a long time. And I think marketers make the best training and awareness managers. That's my bias.
Okay. Well, I mean, I also have a day job in marketing, so I won't necessarily disagree with you. I think marketing, the marketing background teaches you how to get the message across to the audience you're trying to get the message across to, which I think is the goal of training. So,
Yep.
And also I'm in Houston now. I'm outside of Houston now, and I've lived here for 15 plus years at this point. But you mentioned Ford. I'm actually from Detroit, and I still make a point of claiming Detroit as my hometown. And just
we have a lot in common because I'm from Detroit as well, and I also currently live in Texas.
Well, we don't need to go there. I don't know if you're prouder of that than I am. Like I make a point of making sure people know I'm not Texan.
Yeah, I like to say, like a lot of Texans, I wasn't born here, but I got here as fast as I could. But I'm in Austin. I think you can be a little proud of being from Austin. It's harder to be honest. It's hard to be proud of being from Houston, but that's okay.
That's true. I mean, and I don't mind Houston itself per se. Like Houston itself is an all right city. It's more like Texas as a concept.
But brand of Texas.
Right, and whenever they've talked, you drive around and you see the bumper stickers about people want to secede, and I'm like, you know what, I could get behind that, but we get to keep Austin. Like you guys can do whatever you want, but we get to keep Austin.
Yep. I could get behind secession if worse came to worse, if things got really bad. I could get behind that too.
I'm like, don't let the door hit you. Good luck with that. But okay, so I really appreciate your role and your insight on the conversation that we want to have, which is I want to talk. Right now the Olympics are going on, the Winter Olympics going on in Beijing. Interestingly and sort of tangentially related, my wife and I were watching the other night, and I was talking about it, I was like, I'm sure other nations bid to get the Olympics. I was like, why is it basically just the United States, China, and Russia that seem to get 80-90% of the Olympics time?
How did you default to this? Yeah.
Because I was like, I feel like we've been in China a few times now recently, and just it's just kind of interesting, and so it's a weird
easier solutions at this point in the world's existence. There might have been easier solutions than having China host. I see that
because it's I've had conversations over the years with like climate scientists and different people who there's an international community where the American climate scientists talk to and work with Chinese and Russian climate scientists and other and they're below the political spectrum. They're just trying to get stuff done. And they don't have the sort of geopolitical disagreements. They're just trying to work.
Disagreement is frowned upon in that part of the world.
Well, and I feel like the same is true. And definitely it was true when the event we were watching the other night was the women's freestyle snowboarding. And there was an American who was, she was in first place until the final snowboarder, and the final snowboarder was from New Zealand and knocked her down to silver. But as soon as she won, everybody from every country all rushed out there and hugged and piled on and celebrated each other. And so my point being, the sport community is the same way, pretty much. You know, like the athletes, they just want to compete. They just want to do the thing that they love and compete at the highest level and try to win. They don't really care about the geopolitical, tensions that might exist between the United States and China, or the United States and Russia, or all the things that are going on. But to the point of this conversation, as we send people there, you still have to be aware that that those things are going on, that we do have, geopolitical tension with China, and we do have escalating tension right now, with the issue going on with Russia and Ukraine. And then one other real quick side point, and then I'll let you chime in here. I won't just babble the whole time myself. I also have noted that in the past couple of Olympics, the world decided to, slap Russia on the wrist. I'm not sure if it's purely a sports, if it was purely a doping thing, or if it's a combination of sanctions and doping. But Russia isn't allowed to compete, but the Russian Olympic Committee is allowed to compete. And I thought that was kind of a silly distinction because Putin still went to Beijing. I think Russia's there as a nation, and the Russian athletes are still Russian athletes. I'm like, it's kind of a silly thing for us to be like, all right, but we're not going to play your national anthem.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you there. It was a distinction without a difference, I think. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. So I guess, so give me your thoughts on what are the sort of security concerns of being an athlete in China, and what should people be aware of and watch out for, and those kind of things.
Well, I mean, I think they're probably hopefully all keenly aware of how much they're being watched. One of the things that I think is actually kind of interesting, the FBI came out and advised athletes, or really anybody going to Beijing, and the Paralympics in March, by the way, that they should use burner phones, that they should get temporary cell phones and use those in lieu of their regular devices, and then throw those in the trash when they get home, or in the recycling. And that is something that major corporations and have been telling their executives for years. Maybe 8 years ago or so, when I started doing training and awareness, and I was in a business that was expanding into China, that was one of the things we told our executives is anybody going on a company business trip to China has got to use a burner phone. Do not take your normal phone. So the risk there, if you take your personal device, is that you're potentially giving the Chinese access to everything that you do on that device and everything that's stored on that device. So that could include, all the data that's on there, all your images, all of your contacts, all of your texts. That data is just up for grabs at that point. If they're able to monitor everything that's happening on there, get you to inadvertently click on a link that installs spyware or malware on that device, then you can presume from that point, that it's pwned, and say it's everything that has happening on that phone, or has happened on that phone that the phone still knows about, is now in Chinese hands. So that's just not a good thing. The FBI also warned against using things like digital wallets, again, for obvious reasons. Any of those apps that you would normally use on your phone are potentially accessible, and personal information can be stolen. And then installing any those digital tracking tools. They've got the COVID-19 app that all the athletes have to use. I think it's called My 2022, and I haven't read lately an analysis of that app. I have read a few of the headlines and some of the articles. Citizen Lab reported that the encryption that normally protects users' audio and file transfers can be easily sidestepped. So I think I would look at that particular application a little bit with a little bit of suspicion, or a lot of suspicion. So I don't know if I haven't read whether or not all the athletes are required to use it. I have read a lot of stories about athletes using it, and just some confusion around their test results being positive or negative. There were some stories in the press here recently about athletes being whisked away to go spend time in quarantine, and then oops, nope, that was a mistake. You're not really positive. We'll let you go now, and then just a lot of back and forth on positive and negative test results and whether or not they're supposed to be competing or they're supposed to be quarantining, and just a lot of confusion there. So, I just think it's kind of fraught with issues, to be honest.
Well, so it's interesting, you talked about, that even 8 years ago, you're telling executives, if you're going to go to China, be careful, don't, it makes me kind of wonder, sort of like, I get China's a huge market, and we have this sort of frenemy co-opetition relationship with China on the world market. But I'm like, it's sort of like having a friend who's, who you visit their house often, but when you go to their house, like, the whole time you're thinking that they're just going to, you have to watch your wallet. You got to watch, like, why would you still be friends? I'm like, there are other countries we could be doing business with, or if you take sort of greed out of it, if you and you take out the capitalism of it and just say, look, will it cost us more to build it here? Sure. But do we have to worry about burner phones and who's going to, steal our intellectual property? No, right. Probably not as much. Now, I will say that the flip side of that, from a security perspective, we talk about China a lot. We talk about Russia a lot. There are a couple other on the world stage.
There's a few known bad actors out there, yeah.
Like Iran, North Korea. There are nations out there that do these things. But I would say that even the ones we don't talk about, the quote unquote good actors, are still doing it. I mean, it's the nature of being a nation state. Like, and I think, every once in a while, we hear things about, like, that even, France or Germany or the United Kingdom, it's like, oh, they were spying on us. It's like, well, it's like everyone just wants as much information as they can get on everyone else. When
is the last time you saw a Western European ally launch a ransomware attack, a widespread ransomware attack on American, schools and hospitals? I would challenge you on that, because yes, there is, quote unquote spying that goes on, but we don't see anything like the scale of what comes out of China and Russia, North Korea and Iraq, or Iran, pardon me. We don't see anything like the scale of, particularly the first three, China, Russia, and North Korea, happening in such a, and don't forget, these are also countries that have, Russia in particular, has a very cozy relationship with their organized criminal gangs. So they will operate. What's that?
I agree with that, but I was actually going to say, like, so from my view, covering this, like, Russia has a very close relationship with these cybercrime gangs, and obviously, they do what we call state condoned or state ignored, where it's like, right, they can. There's some half degree of plausible deniability where they can kind of shrug their shoulders and say, well, it wasn't us. It wasn't
when
Russian
it suits them.
Intelligence.
When it's convenient. Yeah.
But yeah, and there's also, ample evidence of these, the ransomware and the ransomware as a service exploits have code in them that check first to see if it's got a Cyrillic keyboard.
Right.
Because they know you don't attack Russia or Russian assets.
Right. That's true.
We've actually joked on previous podcasts about, if you want to avoid ransomware, just to install the Cyrillic keyboard on your on your PC. But I was going to say China, to me, is actually even closer. Like, at least in Russia, I'm like, okay, you've got REvil, you've got DarkSide, you've got Conti, you've got all these ransomware gangs that have a very tight-knit relationship. They are very close. I'm positive that, as a semi-expert, positive that Russia knows damn well what they're doing and when they're doing it, and that those organizations are not acting in a vacuum. They are not acting without.
No, there's clearly some coordination.
permission at least. But in China, I feel like the separation doesn't even exist. Like even when we talk about APTs in China, I'm like, okay, but it's China. Like if you're, you are part of the government. I don't, whether you're whether you're a private organization or not, that doesn't exist.
I think one of the most interesting things about China, for me, as a kid who grew up in the 70s and 80s, kind of at the tail end of the Cold War, and our parents had the experience of, as little kids, of having bomb shelter runs and everything, practicing. They didn't just have fire drills in school. They had air raid drills and things like that during the Cold War. And so we grew up as the children of parents of that era, and grew up in the Reagan era and watching the wall come down and all those things. The FBI director gave a very, very interesting speech here recently, where he went into great detail about the Chinese situation and the threat that China is to us, and really how they've been playing a long game. And as I was reading through all the damage that they've done, intellectual property damage, companies that have lost millions, companies that have been put out of business, the damage to our national defense through intellectual property damage in that industry. And it just goes on and on and on. And then you look at the programs that they've set up to do research, the faculty that they have at American universities, visiting faculty, and the research programs that they have, and how intertwined we are with them economically. The number, as you mentioned, the number of American multinationals that 20, 30 years ago now decided that they were going to start to do business in China, even though that meant kind of getting in bed with the party, right? With the Communist Party. That's a prerequisite to doing business there, knowing that the party is going to benefit from the fact that the American company is going to benefit. And it has been greed. You can't really separate capitalism from the equation here, because it's because of because the market is so big and the profit potential is so huge. I think that's what caused most American capitalists at big multinationals to say, you know what, we're gonna turn a blind eye, and we're gonna go there and make money. And shareholders said yes, please, and everybody went along. And can you imagine if we'd have done the same thing with Russia after the Second World War? If we had proceeded to have intertwine our economy with the Communist Party in Russia, if we had visiting professors, even studying, working in fields like science and technology, in things that could potentially be very damaging if they were used against us or against other democracies around the world. If we had, we would have never done that then. We would have never gotten in bed with our enemy the way we have with China over the last 30 or 40 years. So I think we've put ourselves in a precarious position right now. Yeah. If you read Director Ray's speech, it's out there online, and it's fascinating. It's great reading. I recommend it I wish every American could read it, actually, what he had to say.
Well, and I believe there's a book called The Long Game that talks about that their long-term strategy, and
it is. It's a very long-term strategy. Yeah. And we are short-term thinkers. I lived in Germany for 13 years. The Germans are very long-term thinkers when they make business investments and things. Americans are very short-term focused.
Well, and like the Malicious Life podcast, they did a like two or 3 part thing on basically the way China sort of infiltrated and took Nortel down from the inside. And that was an interesting story. It's like partially, well, we're going to steal your intellectual property, but while we're stealing your intellectual property, we're also going to sabotage you in some way. But also, I mean, honestly, I feel, maybe we need to wait another 10 years, 20 years, and someone will write the book and do the research on this. But I think Russia also played so I joined the Air Force in 1988. And so it was like right after, the wall came down, Gorbachev's in power. This is great things going on in the world. And when I joined, my stepmother was like, "Well, I'm concerned about you joining the military. What if you have to go to war?" I'm like, "Who are we going to war with?" And when I got to tech school, they gave us these speeches where there was an instructor who very adamantly was like, "Don't take your eye off the Soviet Union." He's like, "I don't care what they did, what they said, how they're acting. That's the enemy." And I was like, "Eh." And it wasn't just me. Like everyone was kind of like, "Yeah, you're not going to convince us. Like we're not upset with the Soviet Union right now. I think we think you're being melodramatic." But now I look back and I think, okay, well, maybe that was true for some of Russia, but a lot of the stuff I see now, I'm like questioning. I'm like, wait, has Putin been playing chess for 40 years? Putting pieces.
Yeah, that's what most people who study the topic, that's what they believe.
Yeah, and I'm not going to get into the U.S. politics of this, but when I look at 2016 election, 2020 election, what's going on right now with the Republican Party, I'm like, all of these things, I'm like, they all feel like pieces that Putin put on the chessboard a decade ago, and just now is when he's finally getting around to moving the pieces.
Yeah, I think a lot of the misinformation and disinformation campaigns can be traced back to Russia, and that's one of the things that when you talk to people that study the KGB and study their propaganda techniques, that's one of the things that they're really good at is misinformation campaigns. So, yeah, you could say this is definitely a long game. Thank you for your service, by the way.
Thank you. So as a couple weeks ago, when things were first, maybe not first, but as things have been escalating between Russia and Ukraine, and the United States is trying to step in, and all these things are going on, I had made a comment on Twitter where I was like, has it ever occurred to Putin or Russian oligarchs that it's way more lucrative to play nice? I'm like, there's so much money that has to be wasted on moving 100,000 troops to the border and all these things, and and then when we're doing sanctions and the whole world's doing sanctions, and then if you invade, we're going to do more sanctions and we're going to cut you out of.
I mean, what if Russia was so great everybody wanted to be a part of it?
Right, or I mean, just do there's so much money to be made if you just play by the rules. I think
it's about power. I don't think it's just about money. That's the thing. And a romantic notion of what the USSR was, and that it can be that again.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I do think that the United States in general, and more specifically, the left, politically speaking, the left in the United States are not good at the long game. Like didn't even occur to people there was a long game. And and now you kind of see pieces falling into place, and you're like, oh, okay, well we thought everything was great.
I just, after living abroad for so long, I just have a general opinion that Americans are we want pretty fast return for our investments. We just think very short term. We want immediate gratification, all those things.
Well, and this is only tangentially related, but my wife and I were just talking about this recently too, because she had visited. She and my daughter went to. We've been to DC before, but they recently were in DC, and we were talking about, some of the buildings and stuff, and how they've been there for since the United States has existed, on some level, or and. But I was stationed in England when I was in the Air Force and stuff, and I mean, you were in Germany. It's like, that is a different experience. For anyone who's not been to Europe or Asia or off of the North American continent, like you're literally walking into buildings or walking down roads where actual things that you've learned about in fourth grade happened 1,500 years ago. And the building is still there. And that's, so I think there's a whole different sort of perspective on time.
Right.
Whereas our whole nation is like a blink.
Yes, in the course of history. Yeah, we're a very young country, and that's one of the things that breaks my heart about the pandemic is that it put a stop to a lot of student exchange programs. And I had the benefit of being in one of those in high school in the 80s, and that's what steered me, I think, as an adult back to living in Germany and the UK and doing a lot of work in the Middle East and Northern Africa in my 20s was because of the exchange program. So I think if you're a parent listening to this and you have a teenager, it's a great experience for your teen to go live abroad, to get just a broader perspective on the world, like you're talking about, Tony.
I don't, most colleges, I don't believe do this, but my son went to Texas Tech, graduated a few years ago, and they actually had a requirement, at least in his program, that you do a semester abroad.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So he did a semester in Spain and got to, visit Portugal and do different things while he was over there. And so, yeah, I mean, so along those same lines, I'm like, yeah, that should be more of a requirement because, the other thing is when you're in Germany or France or Spain or Italy or whatever, because those countries, it's like, me driving to Louisiana from Houston is like, you're in Germany and, now you're in Spain or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and so that they're much more just multicultural by default. And and a lot of them learn 2, 3, 4, 5 languages by default because like, well, yes, we speak German here, but if you cross the street, they're speaking French.
They also learn to play a lot more nicely with their neighbors because you have another country just right down the road. So yeah, they're better. I would say that they're really good at being citizens of the world. Most Germans, for example, think of themselves as Europeans first and Germans second. And a lot of that's because of their history as well. But yeah, I don't want to leave your listeners with the perspective that the world's going to hell in a handbasket and it's all doom and gloom. In fact, our organization, the National Cybersecurity Alliance, what we really try to focus on is the upside. And I'm on a personal crusade these days. Hashtag no more hackers and hoodies. We want to get rid of using FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt to talk about cybersecurity because it's so off-putting, right? If you think about, we've talked about a little bit about the pandemic, right? Like that stresses people out. We've talked about the Olympics and what the Chinese are doing in the world. That stresses people out. We talked about Russia and what they're doing in the world. That stresses people out. And oh yeah, by the way, North Korea and Iran and every other bad actor that's out there and organized cybercrime. So we're trying to talk about these things and we're trying to encourage the mainstream media as well to talk about cybersecurity issues in language that doesn't just use fear and that isn't all militaristic in tone, right? We talk about attacks and defenses and threats and all this stuff that's super militaristic. And meanwhile, people like my kids and probably your kids just are like, yeah, whatever, right? Like, so if I tell them they're being attacked, is that going to make them stop and enable MFA on all their social media apps? Probably not, because they just, that is a threat that is far off and intangible. It's not immediate and tangible to them. Well, and wanting to use that app isn't, what's that?
The perfect example to me is TikTok. So like, all of my kids, and they range from 15 to, 29, 28. Actually the older ones may not have TikTok, but all the younger ones, they have TikTok. And I have talked to them about it where I'm like, yeah, I'm not sure that's the greatest, I'm like, first of all, the stuff on there is just dumb, but second of all, even if you like the stuff, it's like, all right, but there is the China aspect to it. And, they're always kind of shrug their shoulders like, what are they going to do? Yeah, I don't have any money. I don't care about my, my information,
They don't care. They don't care. They feel like the horse is already out of the barn. So what difference does it make? And so really we try and talk to them about peace of mind. If you use a password manager, you're going to sleep better at night. You're not going to worry about waking up and your account has been hacked or turning on multi-factor authentication. You're not going to worry as much. It's peace of mind. I think it's optimism and peace of mind that we need to be selling when we try and sell our loved ones on better security habits.
Yeah. I will say I'm with you on the hackers and hoodies thing. Yeah. Plus I don't want Chris Roberts mad at me.
Yes. Good point. I don't want
I
Chris Roberts mad at me either.
appreciate the hackers and hoodies. Although I've gone back and forth on the term hacker. So like, and this goes back a long, long time back when I was first starting writing, and I was writing for about.com, and someone, wrote me and was like, hey, hacker, that's a good thing. Like, there's lots of people who are hackers, and it's like, stop using that term to mean attacker or cyber criminal or whatever. And at the time, and again, this is 15 years ago, I was like, listen, I'm with you. I understand your point. I don't disagree with your point, but the ship sailed. And like,
yeah, in mainstream use,
you can't reclaim that word. That's just what it means now. I mean, you can use it for both if you want, but you can't. You're not going to get people to stop using that to mean cyber criminal, because that's just it's an easy way to say it. It's fewer syllables than cyber criminal.
Well, if Chris and I can get mainstream media interviews about that to explain to the press what the difference is between those two, I'd be happy to work with them, because yeah, I prefer Chris's definition. Unfortunately, that's not what the folks on the 6 o'clock news talk about.
Yeah, and I will also put a call out to any the graphic artists of the world, because when I'm doing, so I'm writing a blog post, I'm writing an article, and then I go out to find a stock image, whether it's on one of the free sites like the Pixabays and the Plexels and or Pexels and Unsplash or whatever, or even on Getty and things like that. Like, most of the images, you basically have two options. It's guys and people in hoodies in dark rooms, or padlocks. Everything's a padlock. Either the padlock is closed or the padlock is open. But it's all padlocks. I'm like,
skull and crossbones, or the picture of like literally a sketch of an insect, a bug, right?
Yeah, it's like when I was a couple years back, I was writing a lot more about DevOps and cloud and containers. And on the containers, I'm like, can we get anything else besides like a ship with colored containers on it? Like anything. Like every
you can explain Kubernetes to me, Tony.
Like every single container, that's the only image that exists of containers are just colored containers. Either they're stacked on a dock, or they're on a boat, or they're whatever. That's it.
Which your average developer cannot relate to at all. Yeah. It has nothing to do with the topic. They just couldn't get more creative. I used to work for a training company called MediaPro that got acquired by KnowBe4 last year. And when we were creating training content, the big companies used to train their employees, we set about to make a whole training series that didn't use any of those cliched stock photos. And I also think from a training perspective, it's really bad, because if you, for instance, back in the day when we were all in offices, and you're doing a training module on like using your badge and not letting people tailgate in behind you at the front door, then if you show a picture of somebody in like a trench coat and a blindfold trying to tailgate in behind you, like that is training your employees that these security threats will be easy to recognize. And that's not the case. They are subtle. It is really, really, really hard to tell the difference just by looking at somebody if they're a good guy or a bad guy, or a good gal or a bad gal, right? So we created a whole training series that just used pictures of regular people, but doing things that might look a little bit suspicious, or just got, we kind of train the employees of like, do you know this person? Do you not know this person? Maybe it's okay to like say, hey, you have to use your badge here, just a reminder, right? Or can I walk you to the front desk? Or training, because it's bad. It's a bad learning experience. Not only is it cliched and tacky on the news and in communications, but it's not a good way to train your employees.
Definitely sends the wrong message. And even on the general cybersecurity front, like 5, 10 years ago, the focus was much more on, within the perimeter in this building, we'll assume everyone's safe and secure, and then out there, those are the bad guys. In here, we're the good guys. And it was at least 5 years ago that I started writing about, where I was like, look, at the point of attack, they're all insider attacks, because it's either legitimately an insider attack. It's, literally someone on the inside doing something, or it's a bad actor that has hacked credentials, stolen credentials, whatever. But if you're
socially engineered an employee,
Right. But if you're the IT security admin and you're only looking for like unknown people trying to get into your network, you're going to miss the fact that, it says that Tony Bradley just logged in from Tel Aviv, even though I'm sitting here in Houston, and things like that.
Right. Exactly. No, good point.
I wanted to shift gears and feel free to make any other closing points on China and the Olympics and all that stuff. But I think really a broader, something that applies on a broader level to people in general. Next week is Valentine's Day, and I know that's that's always any breaking news and any holiday is a good time for an attacker to try to exploit and take advantage of.
Yeah.
And then Valentine's Day is no exception to that rule. And like I say, most people aren't planning a trip to China right now, but everyone's going to have Valentine's Day next week. So what are your thoughts on sort of the scams that go on, and there's all kinds of phishing and catfishing and everything else.
Yeah, we actually have on I think it's on staysafeonline.org under resources. We've actually got a Valentine's Day security kit. So you can download this kit, and there's funny security themed Valentines in there, little PDFs that you can use on like social media. And, if you're running a training and awareness program at a company, you can throw them up on Slack or whatever. And then we have a suggested article, and we have tips. And we also have the tips on our webpage. So how to avoid romance scams are one of the topics that we're tackling right now. And we're actually doing some work with the U.S. Secret Service and the good folks at Cofense and Dr. Margaret Cunningham from ForcePoint, who's a behavioral psychologist and knows a lot about the psychology of what makes somebody fall for a romance scam. And we're actually working with the folks at Match.com and all the companies that roll up to Match.com, all their different brands, about, because they're trying to get these bad actors off of their platforms as much as we're trying to warn people, off of these things. So romance scammers are in it for the long haul. We talked about being sort of doing your long-term planning, and they are definitely in it for the long haul. And there's so many people out there that, because of the pandemic, are experiencing profound loneliness, more than normally would, at any other time. When I think about friends of mine that are single, going through a pandemic, going through a lockdown, and not being physically present with other people for weeks on end, I mean, it's scary to think about. Like, I would be incredibly lonely. Thank goodness I have a lovely husband, but being single during a pandemic does not sound like a good time to me. So there's a lot of people, lonely, and that's what these social engineers prey on. And one of the threat hunters at Cofense was telling me the other day that they've actually found a tie, and the Secret Service agreed. There's actually a tie between romance scams and BEC scams, because what they're seeing is that a bad guy will lure a person into a romance scam over time. When they've depleted them of all their money, when there's nothing else left to suck out of the person, the poor victim, they then threaten to expose them and how stupid they've been. Unless they act as a money mule in a BEC scam. So what the Secret Service was seeing was the same bank accounts being used in romance scams and in BEC scams. And that's how they, then working with some victim stories, they were able to stitch that all together. So we in the security world tend to think of specific scams and specific threats and like, oh, this is a BEC, or no, that's a spearfish, or this is a romance scam, or this is a holiday shopping scam. And really, those are just, all different tactics in the bad guy's tool belt. So, of course, they're going to use one to fuel the other, and what have you. Just like we would do in the legitimate business world, right? We don't see all the different lines of our business or parts of our business independently. We do things on one side to support something else, and it all works together. And so we've got a lot of stuff happening in the next couple of weeks, webinars and things like that, and stuff on our website devoted to helping people. And it's not so much about helping the actual victim. Like I'm not under the illusion that somebody's going to read one of our tip sheets on romance scams and that's going to keep them from feeling lonely and feeling like they can be potentially being victimized. But the people around that person, right? All of us have friends or family members that are potential victims for either, sort of elder scams, romance scams, all different kinds of things out there. So the important thing is to work with your family and friends that you think might be vulnerable. I mean, my mother clicks on everything. Like, she has never seen a pop-up that she didn't love. And so we have to put extra protection around her. We have to, talk with her more frequently about this. It's not an unusual dynamic with aging parents that didn't grow up with technology. They have a tendency to be pretty click happy and or to not update their machines because they're afraid that that new OS is going to be too hard for them to learn because they feel so comfortable with what they have that they resist updates or things like that. So it's really about, a lot of the information that the National Cybersecurity Alliance puts out is for us to help the people in our circles that we love and care about. So yeah, it's but we have tried to use some humor in those funny Valentine's cards. They're adorable. I really like them. We had a great time creating those.
Well, when I publish this, I'll make sure and put links, into those resources. This actually might not even be directly related. Like, this could just be like, this might not be a cybersecurity scam. It might just be some other thing. But there's all of the spam phone calls, and so I've got my phone set up to automatically direct any call from someone who's not in my contacts, automatically go straight to voicemail.
That's smart. Which
is helpful, but except for the phone still tells me that the call came in, and I can still see that the voicemail is there. I also have the transcript of the voicemail, so I don't have to listen to it. I can just see, and it's like 5, 6, 10 times a week I get the call from Mary Fuller in the economic something that wants to help me with my tax debt. I'm like, I don't have a tax debt. Or I get the one, call repeatedly about, they want to help me with my student loans. I'm like, I've never had a student loan. And as someone who works in cybersecurity, I always look at these things and I'm like, I don't understand the business model for the attacker. I'm like, you've now spammed. You've called me now 200 times. I've never.
But they probably had almost no cost to do that, right? Because it's all automated. So if it's a numbers game, right? If they hit X number of thousands of people, they only need, one victim to pay for, the automation that they wrote to do those calls and everything else to still have a profit. I mean, that's the thing. It's very low cost, I think, for them.
Yeah. A friend of mine, Ben Rothke, just wrote an article recently, though, talking about, that the regulatory agencies and law enforcement agencies or whatever could probably do a better job. Like, there has to be some way to, for Verizon, AT&T, whoever, to trace back and tell me, well, where did that call come from? I mean, and one of the takeaways of his article was kind of like, well, they're still getting paid for the use of their phone service or whatever. So it's like, they kind of have a vested interest in allowing it to happen on some level.
Yeah, potentially a little bit of a perverse incentive there. Yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of those companies have devoted a lot to, they have a lot of security resources, and I think it's more the case that it's a game of whack-a-mole, that as much as they try and keep up with it, the bad actors just pop up someplace else again under, using a different number. But I agree, whatever they're doing, it never seems to be enough.
Well, and there's I'll have to, for when I publish this, I'll have to see if I can find the resource that actually backs this up. But a few years back, someone published a report or a study where they said that cyber criminals intentionally put in typos and poor English and things like that, because it's a self-weeding process. Like, basically, if you're smart enough to go, oh, that's a phishing attack, you probably weren't going to fall for the phishing attack. But whoever reads the broken English, grammatically incorrect,
still responds
and still clicks, it's like, all right, our odds are better with this person.
That wouldn't surprise me. Yeah. I have not heard that before, but that wouldn't surprise me.
So, all right. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time. It's a fun.
Thanks for having me.
And I, like I said, I'll make sure to link to the various resources that you mentioned. And point people over there. Sounds like you guys have a lot of good assets that we should make sure people are aware of.
Yep, we appreciate that.
All right. Well, thank you.
I appreciate you investing your time to listen to the podcast, but I also invite you to engage on social media. Please go like our Facebook page and follow at TechSpective on Twitter and Instagram. You can feel free to let me know what you like, let me know what you don't like, let me know if you love it, let me know if it sucks, and let me know what products you'd like to see reviewed or what questions you'd like to see answered in future posts.